All right, so we're going to get going. This is a class every June and every December. CAR issues a release of new and revised forms. So yesterday was the release of the new forms, or the June release. So we're going to go over um, not all of them because some of them really don't apply, um, and some were just minor. Um, uh, they're just minor kind of um, housekeeping, issues. But let's start with the. Let's look. Where is this? Yeah. All right. So what you should be seeing is my zip forms, my zip forms page, my dashboard, and we're going to start with the new forms that have come out. Starting July 1st, there's a new law, and it's a required form that has to do with it's called the Fair Appraisal Act, and this form, called the Fair Appraisal Act Addendum, is going to be attached to all of your purchase agreements. It's also, I believe, going to be attached to any listing agreements. So let's just look at what this is: the Fair Appraisal Act. And all it says, it's required by law that any appraisal for the property is required to be unbiased, objective, not influenced by improper or illegal considerations, and race, color, religion. This all stems for, and if you as an agent haven't viewed this, you really should go and view this. There was a Newsweek article that was written on the East Coast about agents and appraisers treating people of color and nationalities different than others. So just Google the Newsweek fair housing, and it'll come right up. So sorry, I'm letting people in as we're going. So this is, like I said, there's nothing for you to do, but it's a required document. So it's called the Fair Appraisal Act Addendum, and it automatically will auto-populate with any offer, with any listing agreement. So you don't really have to look for it. And this law becomes law July 1st. So that's the first one I'm gonna go over, and the next one, and there should be no questions about it because you really don't have to do anything about it. All you have to do is just get it signed, and explain to your buyer or seller that this is a new law that goes into effect July 1st. But since they do these zip form releases in June and in December, they're getting it out in June. So wait, hold on. Okay, the next new form is called the Designated Electronic Delivery Address Amendment. This form is to be used if, when they did the new RPA, they have you put on the RPA, where are we supposed to deliver documents to? And usually it's filled out. If it's not filled out, you use this form to establish where those things are supposed to be sent, because it's deemed that something, if it's sent to this address or it's texted to this phone number, it is delivered. And so so that's it's very important that these where these documents are delivered, it's very important that you know exactly where it is. So it's very straightforward form, and that's the other one. So I'm going to go back. There shouldn't be any, and that's called the Designated Electronic Delivery Address Amendment, DEDA. DEDA. So let's go. Here's the next new form. And a lot of people ask me, okay, it's a building that has an apartment above a store. Well, that's mixed use. Well, they never had a form to deal with mixed use properties. So now they have come up with a mixed use purchase addendum. And it's pretty straightforward. Number of residential units, number of commercial units. You have to describe what the commercial units is. Is the commercial unit currently occupied? Talks about financing, what's included, what's excluded. Allocation of costs. Here's another allocation of costs. Installation of safety features and whatnot. So it's just whenever you have a mixed use property, and by mixed use, it's residential and it is commercial, you would now use this form, the mixed use purchase addendum. So any questions on that? Because that too is pretty straightforward. Not seeing any. I will move on. Okay. Here is now all of my offices are at an advantage because you should all be using this form already, really, because I established an addendum, an advisory, use of non-standard forms advisory. This is pretty much the same language as what's in the form that I have, but now there's a CAR form that's alerting the parties that we're not using standard forms in this transaction, and there's advantages to using standard forms. The use of non-standard forms may automatically waive contingencies, apply passive or automatic contingency removal. Remember, our contract is an active contract. We have active contingencies, meaning that they are in place until they're removed in writing. A passive contract is after the time specified. That contingency will go away. Other states have that in their laws, that if your inspection contingency is 10 days, after the 10th day, that contingency is removed unless you've extended that. So these non-standard forms by other companies or builders or whatnot, sometimes within their documents that they are changing that format. Also non-refundable or automatic release of deposits. And the most important part is number 4. because non-standard forms may contain terms and conditions that differ from standard forms, and your real estate licensee is obliged to present to you all documents received from the another party to your transaction, you are advised that your especially your real estate licensee cannot advise you on the legal or practical applications of non-standard forms. You are advised to consult a qualified California real estate attorney of your choice. So that it's really, really important. Any non-standard forms that that you are given in a transaction, you should be using this form. Yes, any not only, I mean, there was a question when this was gone over by in the CAR brokers meeting. Well, should we be using this for the disclosures that another agency is giving them? You can, but the difference between that and this is those are disclosures. They're not giving anything up. It's a disclosure. It's local disclosures about a certain area, whatnot. This in particular refers to contracts that differ from the standard RPA, in that there are terms within there that they may be giving something up, like a contract from a builder or other brokerages and whatnot. So that's where you would use this form. So it's the NSF, non-standard forms advisory. Okay, moving on. There was a slight change to the additional broker. Oh, that was okay. That was all the new forms. So we're kind of going to go on to revised forms, and the first revised form I'm going to go over is additional broker acknowledgement. And the change to this is that it needs to be signed by the brokers, by the broker or manager. So myself or your office manager needs to sign this form. It didn't used to be that way. It was just between the agents, but now it needs to be signed by the brokers. So just be aware of that. If you are taking a listing or a purchase agreement where different brokerages are involved, and all of my offices, remember, all of my offices are different brokers, different brokerages. Even though I'm the same broker, they're different corporations, they're different GRE numbers, so they're considered different brokerages. So if Calabasas is doing a deal with a Larchmont agent, then they need to, you need this form, additional broker acknowledgement. So, all right. So next one, this is a revision. The cancellation of contract and release of deposit. The last time they revised this, remember they were allowing for partial release of the deposit. They have added one thing to this form, and that is number C. What is it? 2C4. There is no deposit in escrow. I don't know why it took them so long to add this, but they have finally added it. There's no deposit in escrow. Each party to pay their own unpaid contractual fees and costs already incurred and agreed in the contract to be paid through escrow. So that is the only change to this form, in that they finally accounted for the part that there is no deposit in escrow. I just had something canceled with Larchmont, in that there was no deposit, and so no real box fitted. So the agent really didn't check any box in number 2, and maybe that's why the other side isn't signing. But who knows? But that's the only change to this. Except also 2C, it makes it very clear that in 2C2, buyer authorizes release of a buyer's deposit to seller, less the seller's fees agreed upon, pursuant to the property executed liquidated damages. Buyer's authorization of release of deposit to seller is limited to no more than 3% of the purchase price if the property is a dwelling with no more than 4 units, one of which the buyer intended to occupy. So remember, liquidated damages, it only applies to residential 1 to 4 and owner occupied. Liquidated damages don't apply to anything other than that. So the 3% of liquidated damages only applies to residential 1 to 4 and one of the units being occupied. And it makes it clear in this form about that. So that is that. Let's see. Hold on, where are you? No P. Okay, the contingency for sale of buyer's property was changed. A reminder was added to 7B at the bottom of the page. Here is 7B. Can be used to give notice to the buyer to remove the COP contingency rather than a notice to perform. So this form can also serve as a notice to perform, is what they are saying. Language added to the notice paragraph at the bottom of page 2, expressly identifying the conditions required to remove the contingency. So, seller shall have the right to give written notice in writing, remove this contingency, remove the loan contingency, if any, provide verification of sufficient funds to close of escrow without the sale of buyer's property. Seller may use the bottom of page 2 of this form to comply with the written notice requirement. If the buyer fails to complete the actions within 2 days after delivery of such notice, seller may then immediately cancel the contract. So the bottom of this form, which is right here, notice to remove buyer's contingency and proof of funds, this form can be used as a notice to perform to remove this contingency. So that language was added to make it very clear of what they need to do. So that is that. That was the change there. The fair housing, I mean, I'll briefly show it. It's the Fair Housing and Discrimination Advisory. Oops, sorry. Okay, the Fair Housing in paragraph 4 the thing that was added was that they added appraisers to the added appraisers to the list of persons required to comply with fair housing rules, and that goes hand in hand with that that new Fair Appraisal Act, in that an appraiser can't discriminate, on the protected classes. So it added the appraisers to this form, and that's in number 7. The appraisers were added there. So that's really the only addition to this form. I'm going to go over our favorite form, which is the fire hardening and defensible space. So the first thing you're going to notice, it's now called the fire hardening and defensible space disclosure and addendum. The word advisory has been removed from this because everything that was deemed an advisory was now moved over to the WFDA, the Wildfire Disaster Advisory. So everything in the fire hardening and defensible space form that previously was an advisory thing, then that was moved to that form. Now this form, remember, this form is required if a TDS is required by law, which means it's residential 1 to 4, and it's not exempt because it's a probate or anything, or a probate or a bankruptcy or an REO, or if it's a surviving trustee, then then this form is required. And Joe, to answer your question, you need, it's just like Joe's question was this: if they leave, if sellers leave it, do not mark anything, and then there is AB 38. How should we proceed? I mean, AB 38 is a state law, so this is required under those conditions, and it's just like a TDS and an SBQ. It is the seller needs to answer these questions. Are you aware? Are you, the seller, aware of the following features that make the house vulnerable to wildlife and flying embers? If they're not aware, then the answer is no. If they are aware, then the answer is yes. So, so that's how these questions need to be answered. Are you aware? Are you aware of the soffit and the roof ventilation? Their vents have openings. I'm not aware of it, so the answer is no. Okay, so can you move forward and not remove contingencies? Not removing contingencies. I don't understand why you wouldn't remove contingencies. This is a disclosure. This form is a disclosure that's required by law. Okay, so and let's remember, nowhere, and I repeat this, nowhere in Southern California is this report required at point of sale. Nowhere. We are only aware that somewhere in Northern California, like Truckee, is it an ordinance, a local ordinance, that it is required to do this inspection prior to the close of escrow, that it's the seller's responsibility to do this inspection prior to close of escrow. So you are going to answer this question on B, that it is it is the buyer's responsibility, and that there is no local ordinance. C1, buyer responsibility, no local ordinance. Buyer shall obtain documentation of compliance with the state defensible space law within 1 year of close of escrow. That's the way this needs to be filled out. That's it. There is no law or local ordinance at this time where it is required that the buyer or the seller do this inspection prior to close of escrow. So that's number one. I don't see why that you would need to hold up contingencies. This is a disclosure, just like a TDS. If they don't do it, then that's a different story, because it is required. If they're not doing it, if you're representing a buyer and the seller is doing it, then you have to say it's required by law, and the seller needs to fill this out. Now they have added, this is a form that they have added to this fire hardening and defensible space disclosure addendum. It is a defensible space decision tree. Why they call it a decision tree, I don't know. But it is supposedly to make it easier for the seller to fill this form out. So I'm not going to go deep into this, because I can spend all the whole rest of the time we have on this. So what I'm going to do is my next class, which is probably not next week, the week after, in 2 weeks, I'm going to devote it to this form, and we can go through the decision tree and we can talk about it. But just remember that the seller needs to fill out this questionnaire with the thing in mind that, are you aware? And if they're not aware, then the answer is no. And that in Southern California, I know of no local ordinance that requires the seller to do this inspection prior. So it would be C1, buyer's responsibility, no local ordinance. Okay, so I will go over this in my next class. So let's just move on from this, because it only confuses everybody. And we'll go in depth on it on the specific class in 2 weeks. Okay, listing agreements. There has been some change in listing agreements, and the main is the attorney's fees. I want to see if they've attached fair housing, possible representation. I don't know. So in regards to attorney's fees, where are we? Tell me where. Oh, they have duplicated. This is not what I was going to show you, but they have duplicated the entity box, just like they did on the RPA. So you use this, and you no longer have to use a representative capacity. So you use the same, like if it's a, I'm sorry, somebody's trying to get in, they're having problems. Hold on. Oh, never mind. Okay, so if it's an LLC, if it's a corporation, if it's a trust, You no longer have to use the representative capacity. Attorney's fees. Oh, here we go. Attorney's fees in any action, proceeding, or arbitration between buyer and seller arising out of this agreement. Seller and broker are each responsible for paying their own attorney's fees, except as otherwise specified in 22. I think it used to say that that the prevailing party would get their attorney's fees, but that's no longer the case. I don't know when they've changed that, but they did. So those are the two changes in the listing agreement. So let's go back. All right. Cost for repair. There's been a change. Both the RR and the RRRR. The RR was modified to allow the seller to require a buyer to sign a contingency removal form prepared by the seller as a condition of the seller's total or partial agreement to the buyer's request. This addition alleviates the need to use RRR form to respond to the buyer in the situation. So, seller agrees to all. They've added this section 4 here. If seller agrees to all buyer's requests of some of buyer's requests, the buyer accepts seller's partial agreement below. Buyer removes the investigation of property contingency, or the buyer removes those contingencies identified on the attached signed contingency removal form. So that was added to this.
So it didn't replace the contingency removal form. It still needed to be attached to this.
Right, it still needs to be attached, but they made it that it allows the seller to require that they sign the attached contingency removal if the seller's prepared contingency removal as a condition of agreeing to either all or part of the request.
Okay, so just getting rid of the RRRR then in the
right
process.
exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So that's what it did. Basically getting rid of the need to do an RRR in order to get of another form. The RRRR was changed. They're saying that they're not. Let me look at they removed the language. The RR form was modified to remove the brokers from the buyer's agreement. Oh, I see. To remove the broker from the buyer's agreement to release the seller from liability. This change was made because the brokers are not parties to the RRR form. So they've removed the broker. That doesn't seem right. There's something wrong there, but I'll have to bring that up with them. Okay, so that was the only change to the RRR. Okay. Okay. Buyers non-agency. Buyers and seller non-agency agreements. Now remember.
Sorry, I had a great question. Back to the RRRR, is that now completely I just want to confirm, is that completely replaced now? And that's
it is not completely replaced. You can still use the RRRR, but if the seller agrees to either part of or all of the buyer's demands or requests, then you don't have to use it. They've added that, the seller includes the contingency removal, and as a condition, they need to sign that contingency removal in order to get the repairs. That's what they've done.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. Buyer or tenant non-agency agreement. If you are representing a landlord or a seller, and the buyer or tenant doesn't have an agent, and you don't want to represent them, that's fine. But you need to add this form, which is the buyer or tenant non-agency agreement. And it basically says, hey, I'm not representing you, but as in representing my seller or my buyer, I may have to give you some forms. I'm not going to explain them to you, get your own advice on them, but I need to give you these forms in order to finish this transaction. And so you should be using, Joe, I'm not understanding your question, even if we're still getting the full commission. I don't understand commission in regards to what? If you want to put it in the chat, then yeah. But I don't understand what commission has to do. I was talking about request for repair. So what does commission have to do with request for repair? I mean, the request for repair has nothing to do with your commission. That, it doesn't affect the purchase price unless that's negotiated. So I'm talking about buyer representation. You're talking about what? I'm sorry, there's feedback.
Non-agency.
Oh, non-agency. Yeah. I mean, it's whatever you, I got you now. Okay. Well, I would say that you'd have to have a discussion with your seller at that point as to what you're going to do with the commission. I mean, that becomes another negotiating thing, because I mean, there are instances where you don't want to be a dual agent in a deal, so you would need to have a non-agency agreement. I mean, even there's nothing that I've had RPAs that are written by. I mean, somebody, a layman gets their hands on an RPA somehow. They're available online, and then and then it's needed in that instance. So, that would have to be a conversation with your seller or landlord about the commission, because it does break it out that you owe the company X amount of dollars and X or a percentage, and then another percentage goes to the cooperating broker. So, yeah. So what was done in this one, they were modified to remove the reference to agency disclosure, since it's only applicable. They used to tie an agency disclosure to this, but that doesn't make sense, because there is no agency disclosure because there is no agency, because it's a non-agency agreement. So that is what was changed with this. But remember, if you're in a deal where the other side is not represented by an agent, then you need to use one of these forms. In this regards to a tenant buying the property from an owner, sure, yes. The tenant is buying the property from the owner. You're representing the owner. You have no agency agreement with the tenant. You've worked out with the owner what you're going to get as far as a commission, and but you still need to present the tenant with documentation. So yes. Okay. Let's see. The probate agreement and purchase addendum, they've added language. They've added language that the seller has no obligation to sign escrow instruction or incur costs prior to court confirmation when paragraph 4 applies. And paragraph 4 is court confirmation is required. So the seller or whoever the estate, it doesn't have to sign escrow instructions until after court confirmation. So that was what was added there. Okay, let's see. Statewide. Now this seems rather foolish. Well, what was added to the statewide is paragraph E1. Let's see, where am I? E1. Signing documents electronically was modified to advise on the need to read documents. Now, isn't that a novel idea? That rather than just skipping from one initial or the signature block to another, they recommend that you read them. So, that was added to the statewide buyer and seller advisory. So that was a good addition. It also talks about liquidated damages and arbitration, about those initials in there. So that was that. So really a good addition there. Read the documents. And this is only a 14-page document that, halfway through it, they're telling you to read a document. So it's just boggles my mind. But okay. SIP, what changed on the SIP? Let's see. Seller's license to, what was changed is that that language was added to the opening paragraph to warn the buyer that if possession exceeds 29 days recommended limit, an attorney should be consulted as a landlord-tenant relationship could be established. Paragraph 5 modified to prohibit a buyer from moving. This is good. So the first thing is that, look, if you're doing this remember, you only use this form, the SIP, if it's 29 days or less. You need the RLAS if it's 30 days or more, because 30 days is the magic number. It's suddenly a tenancy. So, so it's just advising the buyer to seek the advice of an attorney, because you're now establishing a tenancy. The other thing that they did in paragraph 5, which is good, is okay, buyer may enter property at any time without prior notice, and then buyer may not move personal property into property without prior written consent from seller. If for any of you that has contacted me about, oh, they need to move in early, and they needed to move all their stuff in early because they lost, they're losing their time's up and whatnot. And I say to you always, it's not a good idea. It really is not a good idea, because that buyer moves their stuff into the seller's house. So now it's the seller's responsibility, and something happens to that property, and then there's a liability. Or what about if something in those boxes ignites, and then the house goes up in smoke, and now that's a material fact that there's no more house, and then the buyer backs out. But it was because of the buyers. It's just a vicious loop. Just don't do it. I know everybody wants to be helpful. It's just a bad idea. Do not move personal property into somebody's house before the close of escrow. Or don't, and especially don't let somebody move in before the close of escrow. Because before it's theirs and they're living in it and they see all the problems with it, it becomes a real issue. So please do not do that. The seller multiple counteroffer. Okay. In paragraph 8, it was added the language B, seller accepts a seller multiple counteroffer in backup position. It allows this form to be used to accept an offer in backup position. So that's a nice added thing here that they're allowing. And if you're going to do that, of course, you need also to use the backup offer addendum. So that's that. So it allows you to accept in multiple counter situation, accept one of the offers as a backup right here. So that's great. Okay. Just a few more. Okay, in the SBQ, paragraph 4. Well, makes more explicit that a yes answer should be provided. Oh, this is important. A yes answer is appropriate no matter how long the item being asked about happened or was documented, unless otherwise specified. So it used to be everybody thought, well, if it only happened in the last, I don't know, somebody came up with the 3 years or 5 years. Well, no, it's, if something happened in that house 10 years ago, 20 years ago, it needs to be disclosed. So it's no matter how long ago the item being asked about happened, you should disclose it. So that's really important. 6A, within last 3 years, the death of an occupant of the property, note seller, the manner of death may be a material fact to the buyer and should be disclosed. This is new language, except a death by HIV/AIDS. So it used to be yes, there was a death on the property, but like this says, the manner of the death may be a material fact that is important to the buyer. A natural death is different than a murder or suicide. So it really, the manner of the death should be disclosed. So that's that. Material fact disclosure made in the last time. Paragraph 7E was 7E was reformatted, whether the property was built before 1978. It was reformatted with an explanation for when to answer sub-questions. The question was added, okay. So the property was built before 78. If no, leave A and B blank. I guess that's what they changed. It makes it clear that if you don't have to answer the other two questions if it wasn't built before 78. And then 18B, 18B, any use of the property or any alterations, modification, improvement, or material change to the property due to cannabis cultivation or growth. So was there a big, okay. Was there a big fluorescent lights, grow lights, was the property, modified for cannabis growth? And yes, you make these disclosures in, if in the explanation, if there is anything that's answered yes, there has to be an explanation in the explanation part in that section. 5 years ago, owner passed away, natural cause. Should I report? Absolutely. That's the change to this form, is that no matter how long ago it was, it should be reported. So, so yes, you should report that. Okay. Nope. All right. Okay, tenant occupancy. So if it's by whoever iPhone one is, if it's HIV or AIDS, no, it does not have to be disclosed. There's a law that it doesn't have to be disclosed due to HIV or AIDS. TOPA. The form was modified to make more explicit that the reason for the attached, because everybody gets confused that the rent cap and just cause addendum is attached to this form. It makes it clear. Where does it make it clear? I'm kind of quickly skimming to see where it makes it clear. But it makes it clear that it's only there for informational purposes only. And that the attached form does not have to be completed by the seller or the buyer. Where does that say that? Because that would be good to point that out. Sorry. Hold on, I'm trying to find this. Personal property, seller documentation, instructional seller representation. Oh, no, that's not it. I thought that was it. I don't see it right off the top of my head. So, but evidently that's what was changed, is that the rent cap is only there for informational purposes and nobody needs to sign it. So just so you know, that's an old form. No, the TOPA is the new form. Isn't this? Oh, that is the old form. Why isn't it? Says that this was modified. and it's pulling up an old form. Thanks, Jasmine. So no wonder I couldn't find it. Okay, but evidently there is going to be a change to the TOPA about that, but I don't see it. Okay, the other one that I'll bring it up, but let's see, the wildfire and disaster. No, wait. Wildfire disaster advisory. And like I said earlier, the change to this is this section 5, fire hardening and defensible space advisory. What was in the fire hardening form was moved over to here. So this whole section 5 was moved over. So that's the thing. One thing I remembered that I forgot in the new forms, for those of you who do commercial, excuse me. They have added a commercial seller property questionnaire. So just like the SBQ, commercial now has their own SBQ. So it's the CSBQ. So you can use it. I'm not going to make it mandatory, but it could be helpful. I mean, a lot of commercial agents don't use car forms. They use air forms. So, but hey, if you use car forms and you're doing commercial, something that helps with disclosures isn't a bad idea. So that is that. It's 501. That's pretty. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to everyone. Okay, I am going to. I want you to. Where's this? I'm trying to. No, that's not it. Okay. Here, let's go. There we go. Hopefully. All right. So what should have added to the chat box is like I said, there's a lot more revised forms, but a lot of them were like just housekeeping. But that is a total list of what was revised, and it also has what was revised on them. So download that, guys, for yourself. You can also go to car.org and search June 2022. It'll bring you to the page of the where this quick summary is. It'll also bring you to a link where the red line versions of all of the forms are. So just car.org and search for June 2022, and it's the first thing that comes up. So that's it, unless anybody has any questions. I know I sped through that, but the summary is helpful in that, the ones you really need to, the Fair Appraisal Act, the mixed use purchase addendum is a great addition. Non-standard forms advisory, you can still use the one that I have with every office, or you can use this CAR form. Cancellation of contract. How many times did nobody put a deposit in and nobody really knew how to handle that. So, and like I said, I'm going to go over the fire hardening and this dispensable space on the next class because it is confusing. So so I will go over that. So if there are no questions, I will say adios.